This morning, you cracked an egg into a hot pan without thinking twice. You didn't ask where it came from. You didn't ask what it actually was. You just cooked it, ate it, and moved on with your day. But that egg was never really food. Not in the way you think, it was somebody else's future. Every yolk you've ever eaten was built by another animal to become something alive, and you ate it before it got the chance. That single fact connects you to a habit older than fire, older than language, older than your own species. Humans have been raiding eggs from other animals for millions of years. Not just chicken eggs, turtle eggs, ostrich eggs, fish eggs, ant eggs, duck eggs still holding a half-formed embryo curled inside the shell. So why did eating another creature's unborn offspring become one of the most widespread habits in human history? The answer has less to do with hunger, and more to do with how your brain got so large in the first place. By the time Homo erectus was walking across the plains of Africa, brain size had already begun climbing at a pace almost unmatched anywhere else in the fossil record. That kind of growth doesn't happen for free. Every extra gram of brain tissue demanded a steady, reliable stream of high-quality fuel, delivered consistently enough to support a body that was becoming, in evolutionary terms, increasingly expensive to run. Go back roughly 2 million years, long before agriculture, long before hunting with tools was reliable, and your ancestors faced a brutal math problem. Meat was valuable, but catching it was dangerous and unpredictable. Plants were safer, but they didn't deliver enough energy to build a bigger brain. An egg solved both problems at once. It couldn't run, it couldn't fight back, and it was already packed with almost everything a growing body needed, sealed inside one convenient shell. Fat, protein, vitamins, concentrated calories, arranged by evolution itself to build an entirely new organism from scratch. You didn't need a spear for that. You needed a tree, a cliff ledge, a patch of sand, and the nerve to reach in before something defended it. Your ancestors weren't the first primates to figure this out either. Long before hominins existed, other primates were already raiding nests for exactly the same reason. Jane Goodall documented wild chimpanzees at Gombe eating bird eggs whenever the opportunity presented itself, treating them as a reliable, high-value snack worth the risk of climbing toward an angry parent bird. That behavior wasn't taught. It was instinct meeting opportunity. And once your ancestors' brains started growing large enough to plan ahead, that same instinct became something closer to strategy. Which nests were reachable? Which parents fought back the hardest? Which seasons produced the richest reward? In some environments, eggs didn't just feed your ancestors. They helped them survive entirely. Across the Kalahari, sand communities have used ostrich eggs as both food and water storage for generations, emptying the shell through a small hole, then burying it filled with water beneath the sand to retrieve weeks later. The same shells, once empty, became something else entirely. Archaeologists have recovered ostrich eggshell beads from southern African sites dating back tens of thousands of years, among the oldest deliberately crafted jewelry ever found anywhere on Earth. Which means an egg was never only calories. It was a container, a tool. Eventually, a form of decoration traded between groups who may have never met face to face. How many foods in human history have done that much work? Not every egg looks the way you'd expect either. Quail eggs arrive speckled and barely bigger than a thumbnail. Goose eggs run several times the size of a chicken egg, rich enough that a single one can replace 3 or 4 in a recipe. Emu eggs come wrapped in a deep, almost impossible turquoise shell, prized by some cultures for carving as much as for eating. Every one of them is the same basic biological package, dressed differently by millions of years of separate evolution. This is where the story gets stranger than most people expect. Researchers Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler proposed something known as the expensive tissue hypothesis, and it reframes everything you think you know about human evolution. Their argument is simple but strange. The human brain is so metabolically expensive to run that something else in the body had to shrink to pay for it. Over evolutionary time, the human gut got smaller while the brain got dramatically larger. That trade only works if the food going in is unusually rich, because a smaller gut doesn't have the time or capacity to slowly extract nutrients from low-quality plant matter. Eggs are about as efficient as food gets. No tough fiber to grind down. No long fermentation needed to unlock the nutrients. Just a compact, high-density package that a shrinking gut could process quickly and a growing brain could use immediately. Every time an early hominin found a nest, they weren't just getting a meal. They were funding the most expensive organ evolution has ever built. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham has spent decades studying what actually changed the human diet enough to make that kind of brain growth possible. And eggs fit neatly into that picture alongside meat and, eventually, cooked food. Nutrient dense, easy to digest. Available almost anywhere animals nested, from riverbanks to cliff faces to the sand along a beach. Wrangham's broader argument is that cooking itself, not just raw calorie-dense food, marked the real turning point in human evolution, because heat unlocks even more usable energy from food than eating it raw ever could. An egg makes that case well. Raw, it's already nutrient-dense. Cooked, its proteins become easier to digest and its energy easier to absorb, turning an already efficient food into an even better one. Which means the moment your ancestors learned to control fire, eggs didn't become less important. They became more valuable than ever. Is it any wonder egg eating shows up across nearly every human culture on nearly every continent, going back further than written history? Now, here's the part of the story most people never expect. Not every egg was safe to eat, and your ancestors had to learn that the hard way. Certain amphibian eggs carry toxins strong enough to make a predator seriously ill. Poison dart frogs, for instance, coat their eggs in the same chemical defense that gives the adults their name, aimed squarely at anything tempted to eat them before they hatch. Some reptile species nest close enough to their own venom that a careless raid could turn lethal fast. Even among birds, plenty of species evolved to hide their nests specifically where predators struggle to reach, because the arms race between hide the eggs and steal the eggs has been running since long before humans ever existed. Every one of those defenses exists for the same reason. Something, somewhere, kept trying to eat the eggs before they could hatch. That means eating eggs was never a passive behavior. It was a skill, tested against real danger, refined generation after generation, family after family, until the knowledge of which eggs were worth the risk became part of the culture itself. And that skill left a permanent mark on how your brain still processes food today. Psychologist Paul Rozin has spent much of his career studying disgust, and one of his central findings is that disgust isn't random at all. It's a finely tuned warning system, shaped by what kept your ancestors alive and what didn't. Which is exactly why some eggs still trigger a completely different reaction in you than others, even when nothing about the biology has changed. Part of his research suggests disgust spikes hardest around anything that reminds you a food was recently alive, or close to becoming alive. A smooth, uniform egg white doesn't trigger that reminder. A visible embryo does, which means the exact same nutrients, wrapped in a slightly different presentation, can flip a meal from appetizing to unsettling using nothing but your own mind. Think about a soft-boiled chicken egg. Familiar, comfortable, barely worth a second thought. Now picture balut, a fertilized duck egg eaten across parts of Southeast Asia, developed just far enough that a visible embryo sits inside the shell. Or century eggs, preserved for weeks until the yolk turns a deep greenish black. Or fish roe, piled onto a plate in glistening orange beads. Or ant eggs, harvested by hand in central Mexico and served as a delicacy called escamoles. Or turtle eggs, dug from warm sand by hunters who tracked the exact night the mother would return to lay them. Along the Pacific Northwest, indigenous communities have harvested salmon roe for generations, curing it, smoking it, or eating it fresh straight from the fish, treating it as one of the most valuable parts of the catch rather than a leftover. What looks unusual on a menu in one place is simply dinner in another. That appetite wasn't always harmless either. Sea turtle nests were raided so consistently across centuries that several species were pushed toward collapse, a pattern repeated with seabird colonies whose eggs were harvested faster than the birds could ever replace them. The same instinct that once helped build a bigger brain was left unmanaged, just as capable of emptying an entire ecosystem. Your gut reaction to each of those probably isn't identical, even though every single one is, biologically speaking, just an egg. That inconsistency isn't random, and it isn't really about biology at all. It's cultural memory layered on top of ancient instinct, and it reveals something most people never stop to notice. The line between delicious and disturbing was never fixed by nature alone. It was drawn by whichever community you happened to grow up in, shaped by which eggs were locally safe, locally available, and locally normal to eat. A coastal community that has harvested roe for 1,000 years sees caviar as heritage, not shock value. A community that raised ducks near flooded rice paddies developed balut as a cheap, protein-dense staple, not an oddity to be dared into trying. Meanwhile, an egg that's completely ordinary in one country can trigger genuine disgust in another, even when the nutritional content barely differs at all. Your sense of what counts as a normal egg to eat was built the exact same way your ancestors built their diets in the first place. Through exposure, through repetition, through trust that whatever worked before would probably work again. Here's the twist most people miss entirely. The instinct pushing you toward eggs never disappeared when agriculture arrived. It just got quieter, safer, and far less dramatic. You don't climb a cliff for a seabird's nest. You open a carton. But the pull underneath it is the same ancient one. Dense, reliable, high-value nutrition, available with almost no effort, exactly the kind of food your brain has been rewarding for nearly 2 million years. For decades, nutrition guidelines in several countries told people to limit how many eggs they ate, worried the cholesterol packed into the yolk would harm the heart. Later, larger and more careful studies complicated that picture, finding the relationship between dietary cholesterol and heart disease was far less direct than first assumed for most otherwise healthy people. The guidance shifted. The egg didn't. It had been exactly the same food the entire time, sitting at the center of a debate about how much modern science still has to learn about something your ancestors trusted almost 2 million years ago. That's part of why eggs remain one of the most consumed foods on the planet, prepared in more ways across more cultures than almost any other single ingredient. Scrambled in one country, pickled in another, fermented, salted, smoked, or eaten raw, depending on where you happen to be standing when breakfast starts. Different textures, different rituals. Same underlying craving your ancestors evolved long before any of those cooking techniques existed. The instinct even outgrew food entirely. Long before refrigerators or grocery stores, eggs became something closer to a symbol, precisely because they represented new life appearing out of nowhere. Ancient communities across Persia, Egypt, and Eastern Europe painted and exchanged eggs to mark the arrival of spring, long before any single modern religion adopted the same imagery for its own celebrations. In Chinese communities, families have handed out red-dyed eggs to celebrate a newborn's first month for centuries, marking new life with the exact object that represents it best. Different language, different calendar, same instinct, wearing different clothes. The egg wasn't chosen by accident. It was already deep in human memory the most obvious symbol of possibility your ancestors knew, something small, fragile, and quiet on the outside, holding an entire future sealed inside. Today, that same old instinct plays out inside a supermarket instead of a nest. You don't have to climb, sprint, or outrun an angry parent defending its young. You just reach for a carton, already gathered, cleaned, and stacked for you by an industry most people never think twice about. The risk that once made an egg valuable has been engineered almost entirely out of the transaction. But the craving that risk was built to reward? That part never got the memo. Even the shape of an egg carries an old evolutionary signature most people never notice. Many wild bird eggs are pointed at one end specifically so they roll in a tight circle instead of falling off a ledge, an adaptation that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with keeping the next generation alive on a windy cliffside. You've probably never thought about that while cracking one into a bowl, but it's a small reminder that what's sitting on your counter used to be a matter of life or death for another species entirely. No other species on the planet eats as many different kinds of eggs as you do. Most predators specialize. A snake raids one kind of nest. A monitor lizard targets another, tuned by evolution to one narrow strategy. But somewhere in your evolutionary past, that same opportunism, the willingness to reach into any nest you found, whether it belonged to a bird, a fish, a reptile, or an insect, turned into something closer to appetite without limits. That was never a flaw. It was the same trait that let your ancestors survive in places where other, more specialized species quietly went extinct. So the next time you eat an egg from any animal, prepared anyway, ask yourself what you're actually taking part in. It's not just breakfast. It's the same calculated risk your ancestors took every single time they reached into a nest that wasn't theirs, weighing hunger against danger and deciding the reward was worth it. The tools changed. The danger mostly disappeared. But the instinct that made an egg worth the risk in the first place, that part of you never left. This morning, you cracked an egg into a pan without thinking twice. Now you know exactly why you couldn't stop yourself.